this is exciting news. We've been talking about it on this show. It's the accountability tour, although the left will say it's retaliation for those who went after President Trump, and they were obligated to do so, of course. It's the accountability tour. People like this are being held accountable, Mike.
It's our version of the Taylor Swift Eras Tour. This is, no, this is, we've had the indictment of James Comey.
Yeah.
We, for perjury, when he himself was going after Trump and allies around these perjury charges. We have the indictment for Letitia James for essentially housing fraud when she went after Trump for housing. It's like all these people threw the biggest rocks while living in the thinnest glassed houses. And John Brennan, when it's important to have accountability on this at the intelligence level, because when the CIA comes out and says the Steele dossier is legit, or says we didn't include this, we have such great evidence that Trump is a pawn of the Russians, and it has nothing to do with this dossier, but we can't tell you what it would reveal sources and methods. That gives the entire American media carte blanche to run with that story and to build a Jenga tower of complete lies based on these, base building blocks where they say, well, the intelligence community wouldn't lie to American citizens. So if this is true, that the intelligence community says Trump is a Russian puppet, and they have all this other great evidence beyond the Steele dossier, which is clearly bunk, well, then we can take this story and run with it. From January 6, 2017, all the way up until mid-2019, 2.5 years they ran with this until Bob Mueller collapsed on the stand and revealed that they actually had nothing else. All they had was this Steele dossier, which we were told by John Brennan wasn't even in the intelligence assessment. And so you need to have accountability now to send a message to every future director of the CIA. You run an op against your own democratically elected president to try to regime change our own country. You run that op, you lie to the American people about it, you go to jail. So don't do that, because you're going to end up like James Comey. You're going to end up like John Brennan. So this is the whole purpose of having a legal system with a deterrent, a deterrence function, is so that things like this never happen again, because people like this are remembered for their jail time.
Yeah, and I think that's what needs to happen at this point. The charges need to be filed as quick as possible, because although things are good right now, we obviously have Trump in the White House. If things don't go our way in 2028, they could quickly drop any of these charges that might follow. So getting this through as quickly as possible, I think, is a key priority here. But there's a lot of things that John Brennan did during his time, obviously, as CIA director. And this is just the very beginning. If you're if you're just advising the DOJ as to where to go moving forward with all of this, what other kind of criminal behavior he might have been engaged in, what kind of direction are you going to point them in?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, yeah. John Brennan, remember, it took Stephen Miller and Gene Hamilton's amazing first-rate legal shop, America First Legal, to file actions to get this shut down. But DHS actually created a domestic intelligence unit in order to survey right-wing domestic extremists, which in their own documents said their top demographic were, quote, Trump supporters, and that this one might have political advantage on top of the national security. They used that phrase, political advantage. And who was in charge of that? It was John Brennan and James Clapper, the head of the CIA and the head of the DNI, who ran the Russiagate hoax. So they not only did they run the Russiagate hoax under Obama and then into Trump's term, but then during the Biden administration, they ran this old domestic intelligence unit going after them. I think anyone affected by that should be able to sue on civil liberties grounds. I think that there could potentially be a sue and settle with DHS over that. But John Brennan, all these guys go back forever. I mean, Bob Mueller, who ran the special investigation, the special prosecutor investigation, he was put in charge of the FBI the week before 9/11. That's a little crazy. John Brennan was the CIA station chief of Saudi Arabia in the run-up to 9/11. 15 of the 19 hijackers got their passports from Saudi Arabia. They had 11 Saudi nationals, and 15 of them got it through I think the Jeddah consulate. the head of the Jeddah consulate, this guy, J. Michael Springman, who wrote this book called Visas for Terrorists, wrote about how 80% of the people working at the consulate, the State Department consulate issuing the visas, weren't even State Department employees. They were CIA under diplomatic cover, including his own boss at the Visa Bureau. Meanwhile, John friggin' Brennan is the CIA station chief. This network goes back a very, very long time, and it's a laundry list of crimes. And on the John Brennan side, remember, John Brennan not only set this whole thing up with the Steele dossier and then lying to Matt Gaetz in Congress about it, but then he was on Twitter all throughout 2017, 2018, calling for Donald Trump to be arrested on the basis of it. John Brennan was, some of these tweets read like death threats about how he should be hanged for sedition because he met with Putin to talk about Ukraine matters in the run up to the 2019 impeachment. And so, frankly, I think the perjury charge is important. James Clapper got away with the perjury charge around the Snowden leaks about domestic bulk surveillance. These are spies whose professional vocation is lying. They lie to the outside world. That's what they're authorized to do. That's what they're set up to do. That's why the CIA is a spy agency. The golden rule, though, is you're spying for us. You can't lie to us. If you lie to us, we have to have a mechanism to make sure nobody else does after you because they saw what happened to you. And so I think that John Brennan was even tweeting out that Trump, that it was something like, and I'm curious if you can producer can find this and put it on screen, but it was something like, I will take solace in knowing that Trump will spend the rest of his days in a jail cell. I think this was from 2018 or 2019. This was way before the indictments, saying that this is the CIA director, the guy who's in charge of the Predator drone program to assassinate people, appearing to have advanced knowledge of the Blob's lawfare pursuit of having Trump die in Rikers Island prison at the time while the FBI suit was ongoing. And then, of course, they hit him with 91 felony charges once they took over the Justice Department. But frankly, I think, there's a great case. John Kiriakou is this CIA whistleblower who was persecuted by John Brennan. And what he claims on the basis of discovery documents obtained by his lawyer is that John Brennan personally leaned on the Justice Department, at the time it was Eric Holder, in order to shut John up, even though they didn't have a good case. I believe it was under the Espionage Act. Everyone can follow John Kiriakou on this. I think he just spoke on Joe Rogan a week or so ago. And what he describes is a correspondence in discovery, but I think there's some classification layer that is not available to the public to get this. But Tulsi Gabbard at ODNI could declassify this. She has a unilateral declassification capacity. So does President Trump. And what he described was this shocking document where essentially the CIA directly communicating, the head of the CIA directly communicating with the head of the Justice Department to pursue legal action against a CIA whistleblower, even though they did not have sufficient evidence to get a conviction, because putting him through the process would bankrupt him, would financially destabilize him, would effectively have every public statement he made be potentially used against him in court, so it would shut him up. It would act as a de facto gag order. These sorts of actions need to be completely declassified now. We now have a Democratic mandate, control over these executive branch agencies. Just yesterday, Tulsi Gabbard announced that ODNI had just set up this interagency weaponization working group, which will tie together the State Department, the CIA, ODNI, the Justice Department. You could start right there, the John Brennan files, and declassify every one of these domestic weaponization incidents, from the DHS domestic intelligence group that targeted Trump supporters. Let's get those documents. That was an intelligence group. Those are going to be classified documents. The DHS representative at that interagency working group should declassify every email, every analyst memo, every correspondence, everything on their government cell phones. We should have a Twitter files / Julian Assange style WikiLeaks of our own government, by our government, for our government, and for the American people, And we should have the John Brennan files. Every single one of these weaponization incidences, from everything that was done. For example, this interstitial between the CIA and the Justice Department. This is something that keeps coming up in American history. We saw this in the JFK files. There was this case, for example, where there was this group of exile Cubans who ran this operation against Cuba, even though the State Department didn't want them to. Then the CIA leaned on the Justice Department. This guy's name was Rolando Masfer. Incredible documents, just declassified in March of this year. And it shows how the CIA leaned on the Justice Department, saying, if you pursue this prosecution, it will cause potentially explosive damage to our human intelligence network in Miami. Because if the world news and international community knows the extent of our operations with the Cuban expats, and they will be called upon for trial if we put this guy on trial because all of his friends are CIA assets, this whole thing will blow up. This needs to be done on drugs. I have very serious questions about the role of the Central Intelligence Agency in drug trafficking under John Brennan and Barack Obama. It took Trump to declare these international narco cartels terrorists. I think these groups have been protected for the better part of a century and facilitated through the Central Intelligence Agency. I think this, frankly, has a lot to do with the relations that the Obama administration and Biden administration had with Latin and South American countries. You look at what's happening in Brazil right now with Lula. You go through the evidence there, it seems clear as day that Lula, the Biden CIA-backed president of Brazil, Biden sent the CIA director, Bill Burns, down to Brazil to threaten personally Bolsonaro around not challenging anything about the election, while the State Department, in league with the CIA, brought in electronic voting machines against the domestic president and Brazil's wishes. They back-channeled through Barroso, the head of the Supreme Court, who was working with USAID, in order to divert chips from the American people from Taiwan in the middle of a chip shortage so that they could be sent to Brazil to build voting machines secretly against what the Brazilian president even wanted. So they used the CIA for that. They used the State Department. They said Victoria Nuland down there, she was the head of the political affairs section for the State Department. According to the JFK files, 49% of the entire political section of the State Department doesn't even work for the State Department. They are CIA under diplomatic cover. And this is called CIA reorganization. It's a memo by Arthur Schlesinger in the JFK files. You can look it up. It's a 15-page memo. It's incredible. Look up Section 3. It's called Confidential American Sources. And Arthur Schlesinger, JFK's advisor, is saying in this need to reorganize the CIA because they had usurped so much power from the State Department. He describes how Victoria Nuland, the exact section she would be put in charge of 60 years later, how 80% of the political affairs section in France was CIA under State Department diplomatic cover. And so basically all the political affairs work that state was doing wasn't even controlled by the State Department. So all this political meddling in every country could be directly set by the CIA, no matter what the State Department wanted. And I think you have that today under John Brennan. And I think that, frankly, everything that was done around weaponization of information, we need the new Mockingbird files. We know that all of these CIA-adjacent NGOs, places that had, like the Atlanta Council DFR Lab, with 7 CIA directors on their board, getting millions of dollars every year from the American government. They were the trusted flagger for Facebook, trusted flagger for YouTube, trusted flagger for Twitter 1.0, ran these global disinformation workshops, while they're getting money from half a dozen CIA pass-throughs and have 7 CIA directors on the board. You don't think that Langley, Virginia had any email traffic, any text messages, any interstitials with, with assets or informants or agents who were coordinating with that network? No frigging way. It was in the national security memo, the national security strategy memo for Joe Biden, that populism was a threat to democracy worldwide, and that part of the problem were, quote, emerging technologies like social media and peer-to-peer information sharing that was spreading disinformation, giving rise to populism. When that's in the friggin' national security strategy, and the CIA is a national security agency, there is no way that you don't have something, this coordinated network around internet censorship, being back channeled through the CIA. And in fact, we know they were, because Joe Biden set up an interagency working group of his own. Just like we were talking about Tulsi Gabbard's interagency working group to investigate this, they can start right here. There was a task force that Joe Biden set up out of the White House. It was called the White House Information Integrity Task Force. Information integrity means you can chunk, they transitioned to this term after the Disinformation Governance Board disaster. And they moved to this term information integrity rather than disinformation. Information integrity means you can chunk all news and information into two categories: high integrity and low integrity. High integrity gets whitelisted, low integrity gets blacklisted. It's that simple. And so all these USAID programs, for example, USAID funds 90% of Ukrainian media, 90%, according to Ukrainian NGOs through this group Internews, which Internews on their own website has this fantastic primer video where they say we have to start every meeting in foreign countries by trying to explain to people that we're not the Central Intelligence Agency. Meanwhile, the USAID, you get half a $500 million every year from USAID, and you're running these disinformation censorship networks. Mm-hmm. But this White House Information Integrity Working Group, it was co-chaired by ODNI, so that's Tulsi's group now. ODNI was running this, co-chaired also by White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP, and the National Science Foundation. So you had the domestic at NSF, you had the White House through the OSTP, and you had the intelligence community through ODNI. 26 government agencies were all participating contributors to this giant globe-spanning, government-spanning censorship coordination cell. Among the participating agencies, the Central Intelligence Agency, USAID, the State Department, the Department of War, DARPA, the NSA, and then you add all these adjacent agencies like you had HHS, NIH, and NIAID, all of those, by the way, which draft off of military-industrial complex work. Big Pharma gets its markets created by these military and intelligence, these PEPFAR programs, which are USAID, pharmaceutical programs, but administered by the military, and the logistics are handled by Chemonics, which Chemonics, its own founder, said he set up Chemonics because he always wanted to have his own private CIA. The CIA the deputy director of the CIA, Avril Haines, who then became the head of ODNI under Joe Biden, was at the Event 201 coronavirus pandemic simulator, simulating a bat-borne coronavirus from China in October 2019, exactly the week of the Wuhan Games, which a lot of people think is the real origin of the pandemic. But even by their own stories, just 3 months before the exact same bat-borne coronavirus thing breaks out. And what is Avril Haines doing there? She speaks at the segment on controlling disinformation about the origins of the virus. So the deputy director of the CIA is creating a market for vaccines for Big Pharma, creating the predicate for an emergency declaration that makes billions of dollars for these companies. Meanwhile, you have HHS, NIH, NIAID all in league with the CIA and ODNI to coordinate censorship of disinformation about all of these things. So you can start right there, and you will have a church committee on steroids in terms of everything John Brennan and Avril Haines and James Clapper and Bill Burns and all these guys were doing. And frankly, I think it'll blow the lights out and send a message that we trusted you to be spies. We trained you to lie to the world. You lie to us, you go straight to jail.
Yeah, and that needs to be the tone that's set right now. I mean, now is the perfect opportunity for this administration, for this DOJ, I should say, to go out there and make these people publicly be held accountable, because that's what the American people voted for in the first place. We spent years digging into all of this. It'd be very easy to turn up all of these facts, too, I must say. And it's not much in the way of digging. I know FBI Director Kash Patel literally wrote a book about government gangsters and what they've done to this country over the last few years. So that would be a great blueprint for how they go about all of this. So we're hopeful that the grand jury stories that are all kind of going on all around the country could lead to that. I wanted to back up a little bit, though, because you mentioned something, and we talked about it last time you and I sat down. We've got about 90 seconds left. We talked about Brazil last time. The new update, though, that we haven't spoken about personally is Jair Bolsonaro has been sentenced to 27 years in prison. We do know President Trump did get on the phone with Da Silva and did have a conversation with him regarding, we don't know what, but we're hoping it's that. What is your reaction to the 27-year sentence? Because again, like you said, the Biden regime went in there and threatened him, a nice probably softball threat, but now all of a sudden there was these hooked up fake charges and now he's going away for 27 years.
Right. Trade, aid, security, sanctions. These are all levers that the White House and State Department and Treasury have to pull to the maximum degree. And frankly, a lot of that is also going to be helped, I think, through declassifications. Bill Burns makes a personal visit to threaten Bolsonaro. I want all the CIA files on Brazil. Mm-hmm. I want all the USAID files on Brazil. I want all the State Department files on Brazil. I think Brazilians have a right to know that. The State Department embassy in Brasilia was hosting disinformation conferences and personally funding the exact sense of Abrage, the Brazilian Association of Investigative Journalists. Brazilians see that and they think, oh, it's called the Brazilian Association of Investigative Journalists. They must be Brazilian. But they're getting money from the U.S. State Department. I want every file to be made public for Americans to see how this is weaponized. And every Brazilian should know what gave fruits, what were the secret forces behind that previous election, and let that play out there. And frankly, this is one of these things where you weaponize this at home, you use this as a sword abroad. You can't use that classification as a shield if you use it at home. You lose your classified status the moment these networks get weaponized at home. And when Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, the most powerful man in the Senate, is comfortable getting on MSNBC on primetime live on Rachel Maddow and saying, you never mess with the intelligence agencies because they have 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. You get back at them, and they end up with the same mugshots they forced Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani and hundreds of others in. You don't do that again. You don't use those 6 ways because we've got ways to get back at you too.
Yeah, and that needs to be the tone set. Mike Benz, thank you for joining us in studio. It's an honor to have you here over at Infowars, so thank you.
Thank you, Breanna.